Hi guys, I'm Ryland Rumor and we're Team 8. With me today, I have Jacob, Brady, Alyssa, and introducing today's overview will be Jaime.
Thank you, Ryland. I'm Jaime, and the overview for this presentation is as follows. Brady will present the hypotheses and problem statement. Ryland will present step 1. I'll present step 2. Brady will then present step 3. Jacob step 4. Alyssa step 5. Jacob will then present the conclusion, and Alyssa will present the question and answer. I will now pass it on to Brady for the hypotheses and problem statement.
Thanks, Jaime. My name is Brady, and I'll be going over the problem statement and hypothesis. So as we all know, Kraft Macaroni and Cheese's slogan is "It's the cheesiest," but that slogan has not been scientifically proven by a third-party entity or another company. So we decided that by comparing 3 different companies' macaroni and cheese, by performing a blind taste test, we could effectively decide whether Kraft Macaroni and Cheese is or is not the cheesiest. I will now pass it off to Ryland to go over experiment step 1.
Thank you, Brady. As stated, our objective of our experiment was to test the legitimacy of Kraft's slogan, and the way we are going to be doing that is by basing it off of other brands of mac and cheese with the same types of instruction and measurements. So as listed with our materials, as you can see, we tried to keep our budget as cost effective as possible with a budget of under $5. And as you can see, Kraft mac and cheese was the most expensive, being at almost $1, while the other 2 were much less expensive, being at 30 to 40 cents. Going over the timeline of our experiment, it was done over the course of 4 days. On the first day, what we did was we went and gathered all of the materials needed to perform the experiment. On the second day, we went and got our participants in order to test which brand was the cheesiest. On our third day was when we went and actually made the mac and cheese and ran the experiment. And on the 4th day is when we tabulate all of our results. One question I'd like to ask you guys to reflect on is, do you guys think that the cost of mac and cheese had any sort of correlation as to which one was the cheesiest? So going over the variables of our experiment, we wanted to keep things as controlled as possible. That way, any outside interference could be minimized. So for our internal variables, we wanted to make sure that the 3 brands that we selected had the exact same type of measurements and or instructions in order to produce this. That way it can be replicated amongst all 3 boxes of mac and cheese. Lastly, with our external variables, one thing that we couldn't necessarily keep consistent amongst repetition was the pot size that everybody used. But the way that we minimized that was that if you were conducting the experiment, you were to use the exact same pot for all 3 brands of mac and cheese. Thank you. Now I'll be passing it off to Jaime for experiment step 2.
Thank you, Ryland. So the overview of the potential designs that we came up with were 3. The first design was a volumetric measurement comparison where we used the whole box and its ingredients, and we followed the instructions on the box to determine which one was the cheesiest. The second design was a ratio of cheese to macaroni, which we only used a certain portion rather than a whole to determine which one was the cheesiest. And the third design was a blind taste test where we used other people's opinions and we had them taste the mac and cheese to determine which one was the cheesiest for them. The designs that we ended up picking was the first and the third design. The first design was the volumetric measurement comparison where we used the whole box rather than a certain portion. We chose this because the box usually comes with its set ingredients and instructions for those ingredients. And if we only use a certain portion, it would be much harder and it would result to more errors occurring. So therefore we picked the volumetric measurement comparison to determine which one was the cheesiest. And we also chose the third design, which was the blind taste test. So going on to that, has anyone ever done a blind taste test between 2 identical foods that were prepared differently or just different brands? Most of us probably have, and sometimes the one that we prefer or expect is probably not the favorite or the best in terms of taste. So going on to that, we chose design 3, a blind taste test. It gives us an unbiased approach. So we use that to determine which one was the cheesiest in terms of a qualitative approach. I'll now pass it on back to Brady, who will present step 3.
Thanks, Jaime. So for experiment step 3, our experimental setup, each teammate obtained 3 different samples from 3 different companies of macaroni and cheese. Following each company's instructions on the back of the box, we cooked the macaroni pasta. Following that, we followed the instructions on each box on the back and added the milk, cheese, and butter per their direction. We then added the pasta and the ingredients together, and we passed it off to 3 different people that we knew to perform a blind taste test where they did not know which product was which. We recorded the results on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being the most cheesy and 3 being the least. So for the data integrity, we thought all data from each sample should be sound if each team member follows the instructions with care on the back. We do everything the exact same per the box, just like preheat time, boil time duration, and we use the same type of milk, like 2% or whole, and the same company and type of butter. Even though the taste test will be subjective or was subjective, it adds the element of consumer experience, which is what the point of macaroni and cheese is. And the people that we had taste the macaroni and cheese then decided which one was the cheesiest. So after all tests were done, we concluded that Kraft was in fact the cheesiest. Looking at the chart on the right, on a scale of 1 to 3, on average, Kraft received a 1.5, Winco received a 1.58, and a Great Value received a 2.92 out of 3, with 3 being the lowest score for cheesiness. So we concluded also that the average amount of cheese powder that was measured showed a correlation with the perceived cheesiness of the macaroni. So for a little quiz for you guys, which company was found to be the second cheesiest sample? I'll give you 5 seconds to respond. Yeah, that answer was Winco. So now I will pass it back to Jacob, who will be going over step 4.
Our data did show that Kraft was the cheesiest macaroni. The amount of cheese that we measured was too close together to be conclusive by itself. But thanks to our blind taste tests, we actually were able to figure out that Kraft was the cheesiest macaroni. I'm now going to pass this off to Alyssa.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, I'm Alyssa, and I'll be presenting step 5. Before I show you the next slide, I'd like you to take a moment to write down whether or not you think Kraft accurately reports their level of cheesiness. That is, the amount of cheese they have compared to their macaroni. Do you think the observed cheesiness will be less than, equal to, or greater than Kraft's given recipe? Did you get a second to write that down? Awesome. In each box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, there should be 1.15 cups of macaroni and 0.33 cups of cheese powder. However, our observations found an average of 1.125 cups of macaroni and 0.25 cups of cheese powder. This means each box has slightly less macaroni than you'd expect. However, when comparing the reconstituted cheese, that is, the cheese powder mixed with milk and butter, to the amount of macaroni, we found that there was consistently 6 times more cheese to macaroni. This is true in both the given and observed values. Is that surprising? Did you get it correct? Let us know below in the discussion post. I know pre-experiment I was expecting Kraft to inflate their level of cheesiness. Next, I'll discuss some possible design improvements with our experiment. For one, our group decided to do volumetric measurements instead of ones of mass because not everyone had access to a kitchen scale. This is unfortunate because volumetric measurements are variable to things like humidity or heat, whereas mass remains fairly consistent. Our next flaw was a constraint due to the pandemic. We unfortunately could not perform a simple random sample, which would give the most accurate feedback in our blind taste test. Rather, we did a convenience sample which suffers from convenience bias, as we all had our roommates do the blind taste test. Our third, and a very critical flaw, was that we failed to write a script to read to our participants in the blind taste test before we had them judge each macaroni and cheese. This means each participant in the blind taste test may have been judging on a slightly different criteria. Next, Jacob will be presenting the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. So based off of the experiments, we did prove our hypothesis correct, that Kraft is the cheesiest. We did see, however, that Windco was a very close second, and Great Value actually did better than we expected it to be. It was only thanks to our blind taste test that we were able to prove which one was the cheesiest. I am now going to pass this back off to Alyssa.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, it's Alyssa again. We are now at the Q&A session of our presentation. Make sure to leave all questions down below in the discussion post. We'll make sure to answer in a timely manner. Thank you for joining us for our presentation, and have a nice day.